So as we dive into this 5-step process, there are a couple of things that are really important to keep in mind and that really help me stay grounded regardless of what behavior arises. One is the reminder that all behavior is a form of communication. Our kids communicate with us through their actions. They don't do things for no reason. Behavior is something that we can investigate with kindness and curiosity. Kids are often expressing unmet needs to us through their behavior, and we can investigate that. We can think about what is the underlying need here. We can use the thoughtful part of our brain to remind ourselves that this is communication and I can work this out. So sometimes our kids have unmet physical needs, like I'm hungry or I'm cold or I'm thirsty. Sometimes they have unmet emotional needs for connection, for attention, for attunement, needs to be heard. Right? Our kids express those unmet needs more often through behavior than through language. So take it as such. And then when really difficult behavior arises, nothing has helped me more than repeating the mantra over and over to myself. This kid is not giving me a hard time. This kid is having a hard time. This kid is not giving me a hard time. This kid is having a hard time. And when we can remind ourselves of that, it helps us get out of our protective brain. It helps us avoid feeling like the victim, something's being done to us, and gets us into a place where we can be the helper. Right? This person isn't giving me a hard time. I might be having a hard time too, but that's about me, not about the child. Right? This child is not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time, which automatically orients us to how can I be the helper? How can I support? How can I be compassionate and help this child move through the experience in a positive way? So I repeat that to myself countless times. I can't even start to think about how many times I've said that to myself. It's been a really, really important tool for me when challenging behavior comes up. So let's think about how we approach this. Okay, so something goes wrong. We've set our kids up as much as we can for success, and still something happens that's difficult. Let's take a simple example, one that comes up a lot, which is that kids come in and you've got maybe yoga mats set up and the space all ready to go, and they've got their shoes on and they start running around in the room and they're walking on the mats, right? They're running around on the yoga mats with their shoes. This is a really simple example. It's not the most intense problem you're gonna face, but I use it as an example because it's a common challenge, and it really helps us illustrate how we can use these 5 steps to meet that challenging behavior in a way that feels good for everyone. Okay, so imagine this scenario. Your kids are running into the room, they're running all over the place, they've got shoes on, and they're running on these mats that you just set up and maybe even just cleaned. So the very first step of the 5-step process is assess. Okay, so assess the situation at hand, assess the problem. So there's certain questions that can help you assess the problem. One is there a safety issue? If there's a safety issue, you want to immediately act to get everybody safe and then come back to the 5 steps. Okay, where do I need to go from here? Right? Don't get everyone safe and then move on, right? Figure out what was creating that situation and actually address it with the 5 steps. But if there's not a safety issue, then we want to ask ourselves questions like, what's the problem here? Is it a problem for me or the kids? Is that really the problem? Right? Because we want to get to the root of what's actually the thing that needs to be solved. And this may sound like I'm harping on it a little, but it is amazing how many times I have experienced myself and also observed teachers attempting to solve the wrong problem. And if we're trying to solve the wrong problem, then we're short-circuiting learning, we're getting fixated on behavior, we're clogging up the gears of the process, right? So these assess questions, right? Who is this a problem for, me or the kids? Okay, how I engage with it will be different if it's a problem for the kids or a problem for me. Right? What is the core problem here? Is it even a problem? Sometimes the assess step is the only one you need, because what you realize is this isn't a problem for the kids, it's just a problem for me, and it's not even a very big problem for me. Why am I telling them to change their behavior and making them feel like they're doing something wrong? Right? A perfect example is like kids who fidget when they're listening to you. You may not like it, and it's very tempting to say, like, sit still because it's distracting to you or it makes you feel like they're not listening. But if you go through the process, okay, assess the problem. Is this a problem for the kids or just a problem for me? Oh, it's a problem for me because it's bugging me. Is it actually having an impact on the kids' experience? Maybe not. Maybe I just need to deal with that and not tell them to change something, right? So assess, figure out what the real problem is. Now, in that scenario I shared with you, the kids running around with shoes on yoga mats, what would the real problem be? Okay, it's not a safety concern unless they're like really going crazy, and then you can deal with it. But say they're safe, they just have a lot of energy, they're running around, and they have shoes on the mats. Well, some people think of that problem, if they're kind of in a particular mindset, as they're being disrespectful, or they're not listening to me, or they're not doing what they're supposed to do, right? That's one way of talking to yourself about the situation. But I think if you really assess and you use the framing of like, is this a problem for me or the kids? Is it about my feelings? Is it about my discomfort? What's the core of the problem here? What you get to is, the core problem here is shoes make yoga mats dirty, right? The core problem isn't that these brats won't take off their shoes, or they're not listening, or they're not paying attention. The core problem is shoes make yoga mats dirty, right? So once we find the core problem, then we can address it. Shoes make yoga mats dirty. First step is assess. Okay. Then after we assess, once we figure out, is this a safety issue? What is the actual problem? Who is it a problem for? Then we attune. And attunement is about checking in with ourselves and our emotional experience of the situation, and checking in with the kids, making them know that we're on their side, helping to validate their emotional experience, helping to give them the sense that they're seen, that they are heard, that we are not just interested in their behavior, we're also interested in them and what's going on for them. So when we talk about attuning, when I think about what this really means, it's like check in with me, check in with the kids, check in with the relationship. Do the kids know that I'm on their side? Because if somebody doesn't feel like you get it and are on their side, they don't have a lot of motivation to pay attention to what you have to say, right? And you can think about this in your own life, even as an adult. If you're having a hard time with something and you feel like the person you're talking with doesn't really get it, they don't really understand your emotional experience of the situation, they haven't heard you, they're not on your side, then what they have to say about the problem is not very relevant to you. You don't really want to hear it, right? But if you feel like that person gets it, they're sitting with you and seeing you and really working to understand your experience of the situation, all of a sudden what they have to say becomes much more relevant, right? We get much more interested in it, and we can feel like we're not alone in it. And so the attune process is, what are my feelings? What's the kids' feelings? And that might involve thinking about what are the underlying needs here. And then how's the relationship doing? Do I need to do anything to connect with this kid before I try to address the behavior, right? It's always about connecting first and then taking the next step that addresses the difficult situation. Again, this all assumes that you've gotten the kids to a point where they're safe, okay? So if there's a safety concern, it precedes the 5 steps, and then you implement these 5 steps. So what would this look like? What would attunement look like in a simple situation like we were just talking about, kids stepping on the yoga mats, okay, running around the room? It can be really simple. It might be just noticing your own annoyance, saying, okay, like let's get rid of that, let's settle that down, let's see it and put it over here because I'm with the kids right now. I'm gonna prioritize what their needs are. So attuning might look like checking in with your own frustration. Then it might look like taking a closer look at the dynamic. Are the kids running around because they're excited, because they're feeling happy, they have tons of energy? Are they running around because they don't know where they're supposed to be, right? Really attuning to and asking yourself, like, what's driving this behavior? What's going on for them right now? Right? Checking in, and then saying something that validates them, that lets them know you're not just mad, you see them. And it can be as simple as, I'm so glad you guys have so much energy today, right? I'm really excited to use that energy for da, 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 right? I'm really excited to share with you this game that I've been thinking about teaching you. I think all the energy you have today that you're showing me is going to be so useful when we do that, right? So saying something that helps them feel like you see them, not just see the problem. Right? Then you can move on to start addressing the solution. Sometimes I've heard this said, and I think about it often as the idea of when a challenge arises, you want to lead with relief, right? So whether it's an interpersonal conflict or a situation where you need to get the kids to behave in another way, you want to lead with whatever will relieve the nervous system of having to defend itself. You want to lead with relief so that the kids feel like you're on their side, not something they have to protect themselves against. Leading with relief allows the protective brain to relax and the thoughtful brain to engage. So attuning is checking in with you, checking in with the kids, checking in with the relationship, and then doing whatever you need to alleviate the sense in the child that they need to protect themselves against you and your judgment and your orders. Right? So we assess and then we attune. Right? And when we attune, we ask ourselves, does it seem like these kids or this child are starting to feel better or worse? Right? If the kid isn't feeling better, we have to stay with attune. We're not ready to move on. Right? The kid has to be at least a little bit relieved in order to know, okay, now we go on to respond. So we assess, we attune, and then the third step in the process is respond. And when we respond, what we're doing is giving the child information, right? When we respond, we're not telling the kid what to do, right? We're not responding with a command or an order. What I think of respond as is an opportunity to provide information or give the child some perspective to add to the situation something that engages the thoughtful brain, and then give the kid an opportunity to make a good choice, right? Because we always want to be teaching decision making. We always want to give the kids experiences where they feel like they've come to a good conclusion to a difficult situation because of their own internal choices, and that they feel good about that. Right? If we just tell a kid what to do, there's a high likelihood that they're going to feel some shame or some embarrassment or some fracture in the relationship, like we think they're bad, right? But if we just provide information and give them an opportunity to act on that information, there's no push-pull, right? There's no shame, there's no blame, there's no pushback because we haven't pushed, right? It's just information. Now, this is a slower process, right? This is obviously a slower process than just, hey, you do that, right? But it's a learning process, and it's worth slowing down for. So the respond piece is all about giving information and then waiting to see what happens. And then you might need to give a little more information and wait again to see what happens. And you have to use your judgment, right? How much information are you going to give before you're going to try something different if it doesn't work? Right? All along the way, with all 5 of these steps, you're waiting to see if maybe this is all I need, right? So sometimes we assess the problem and I'm like, I guess that wasn't as much of a problem as I thought. I don't need to do anything else. Sometimes we attune to the child in front of us, and being seen feels so good that the kid solves their own problem, right? And this happens frequently, where we validate the internal experience, we give that kid a sense that we get it and are on their side, and it just allows the protective brain to step back enough and the thoughtful brain to engage enough that they don't need us anymore. We don't have to do anything else because they've figured it out. Right? Sometimes that doesn't happen and we go on to respond, where we provide some information. And that might just look like describing what you see. Like, I see shoes on yoga mats, right? Because sometimes the kids are not trying to do anything wrong. They're just excited and they're running around, and they might know that they're not supposed to walk on yoga mats with their shoes, but that wasn't the thing at the very front of their mind in that moment. And just going through what's the real problem? Okay, shoes make yoga mats dirty. attuning to them, connecting to them, reminding them that you're here in relationship, and then saying, I see shoes on yoga mats, is sometimes enough for them to go, oh, those are my shoes on the yoga mats, and take their shoes off and move on. Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you say, I see shoes on yoga mats, and nothing happens, right? So you might wait and then say something like, shoes make yoga mats dirty, right? And see if that little increase in information results in a different choice.